Hello and good afternoon. I wanted to discuss an issue, give you guys the scoop on an issue that you'll likely hear a lot more about in the coming months. The moratorium on rent payments and the impact that that's going to have on evictions and the implication for landlords. So there was a relief bill signed into law in March that paused evictions through July 24th for those who receive federal housing assistance and for non-payment of rent on properties with federally backed mortgages. On top of this, many states like New York State, Illinois, and California have hit the pause button and blocked landlords' ability to evict tenants for lack of rent payments. In most cases, the moratorium doesn't mean that tenants aren't obligated to pay rent whatsoever. It just means that if they don't pay rent during that specified period, they're not at risk to eviction, but they'll still need to pay that back rent at a later date. So these pauses on evictions are all temporary with set end dates. However, the pause on rents is not a pause on eviction proceedings, and this is where the issue is coming into play. States are finding that landlords are preemptively filing eviction procedures for non-paying tenants, so that basically the paperwork is going to go through on the day the rent moratorium ends. The seriously unfortunate part is that this is going to potentially cause mass evictions in the states that have this moratorium, and for those individuals who have literally no source of income right now, leaving families potentially with nowhere to go. And evictions typically happen pretty quickly and pretty swiftly because they're pretty straightforward. I didn't receive any payment, you can be evicted. But with this video, I really want to point out how poorly thought out these rent moratoriums are for both sides, for both renters and landlords. I think it's great to help people and to have programs in place for when bad things happen, but there needs to be a look at the bigger picture when you implement some kind of plan. With these programs, all it's doing is shifting the struggle from the lower to lower middle class individuals who are renting to the middle class. This is because there's no assistance as a part of any of these programs. I've looked at several states' rent moratorium programs. Not a single one had any assistance for landlords. Now, I'm not concerned or complaining that rich people or businesses with hundreds of tenants need more assistance. They have options, they have surplus capital, they can sell off properties. There's things that the ultra rich and the more successful businesses can do. But I'm talking about the middle class landlords who have, maybe one or just a couple tenants as a supplement to their income. Basically, it's like a retirement plan for these people. These are people who saved up over years, bought a second house to rent it out, maybe saved up and bought like a duplex or something like that. These people are just as much at risk as the tenants are because most of them work full-time jobs, and like I said, this is kind of their retirement plan. You don't make a whole lot of profit on renting out a house. The goal is to build up equity. Later you can sell it, or once the mortgage is paid off, then you can collect a few $1,000s a month. A perfect example is the guy I rented a house from about 4 years ago. He worked full-time at a tech company, and I rented out his old house. He bought a new house, he kept the old one, rented it out to me. During this epidemic, he would have been just as likely to lose his job as I am, really. But the state puts in a rule that says the tenant doesn't have to pay for X amount of days, while the landlord, who could have also lost his or her job, still has to pay their mortgage for their home and for their rental property. So it's just kind of frustrating how this is set up. And I don't even own rental properties, by the way. I'm just looking at this from the outside view. I'm not a renter. I'm not a rental owner. So here's a quote from the California Apartment Association in reference to their state's pause on rent. They said, "The move is unnecessary and overly broad and invites tenants who have the financial wherewithal to pay their rent to withhold from paying their rent, leaving landlords struggling to cover their own bills and to keep employees on payroll." The employees on payroll would talk more about like larger rental companies, but to struggle to cover their own payments. Yeah, it's pretty obvious. So again, I'm all for people getting help and support, but how could they not look at the secondary effects of this? I mean, it can't be a surprise at all that landlords are filing for evictions as soon as possible because really they're left no choice. It's either I evict these tenants and try to find someone new, or I get my house foreclosed on, my rental property foreclosed on, my retirement, whatever. So, I mean, yes, you could say tenants technically still owe rents after the pause, but I mean, good luck collecting that as a landlord. If someone can't pay for 1 month's rent, how the heck can you expect them to come up with like 3-4 months worth of rent all at once later on? I mean, that's not very reasonable. All I'm saying is if you're going to create a relief program, be willing to give relief to all parties involved. Otherwise, you're just shifting the problem to one other group of people. I really don't like to complain on my videos, but looking at this, it just seems like nonsense. So I just sat and thought about it for a minute, and here's the solution if states want to pause rents and also to prevent evictions after the rent pause is lifted. So, number one, pause rents for those who can certify they can't afford it because of the current circumstances. Maybe documentation showing they lost their job or something like that, some kind of certification. Number two, create a fund for landlords to draw from if they certify that their renters cannot pay rent. And then number three, as a side note, if your state can't afford to set up a fund like this for landlords, you shouldn't use this solution. You should be creative and find a different solution to evictions and to the rent problem. Something like federal funding. I mean, if all the states got together, went to the federal government and said, hey, we need a funding program for landlords so we can pause rent, you probably would get it. I mean, you have state senators who vote on these things. So, boom, solved. I don't know, this whole thing just seems pretty ridiculous to me. So I figured I would just make a video about this so we can talk about it, because I'm sure we're all going to hear a whole lot more as soon as these rent pauses are officially coming up for each state. So I'd like to thank you for watching, and I hope you have a profitable day.